A spec script with a mediocre concept is basically dead in the water. I'm Nathan Graham Davis. I'm a Hollywood screenwriter living in Massachusetts, and if this is the first video you've seen from this series, then congratulations, you've stumbled upon a one-of-a-kind 15-week screenwriting course. And you don't have to pay me a thing for it. I'm fortunate enough to make my living as a screenwriter, and I got here largely because of the help of other writers, so this is me paying it forward. If this course sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend that you start with Class 0, where you can find out if this whole thing is for you. To those of you following along, if you've made it to week 3, that means that last week, in addition to reading another script, you wrote a 3 to 7 page screenplay with 0 dialogue. So first of all, congratulations, you finished a piece of writing. I hope you're proud of it, but even if you aren't, that is okay. 3 months from now, you're gonna have written something so much more extensive, and this was a no-stakes exercise to help you build toward that. Some of you may have even shared your shorts with your writing groups. As I said last class, that's not necessary with these short scripts, but sharing your work with other writers is a critical part of getting better, so if you feel comfortable, I definitely recommend it. In terms of offering feedback, a lot of new writers feel like they have nothing to offer, and I get that, but first of all, you gotta start somewhere, and second, you have likely seen a bunch of movies or you wouldn't be here in the first place, so you have something to offer. So do your best to point out a couple things that you thought worked well, and then, while still doing your best to be supportive, point out anything that just felt unnatural or unclear. But anyway, we'll talk more about giving feedback in later classes. This week, it is all about concept. This is a topic that I am super passionate about because I have come face to face these past few years with how incredibly important it is in terms of launching careers and getting movies made. And I think there are way too many otherwise great writers who don't fully grasp how true that is and who don't put enough time into their ideas. And that is tragic because it means they waste months of their lives on scripts that probably never had a shot in the first place. I've certainly done it with many of my own scripts in the past, so please learn from my mistakes, and if you're gonna spend the next few months writing something, let's make sure that it's something worth writing. I talked a little bit about concept last week, and if you remember, I said you should ultimately be focused on 4 things: the setting or the scenario, the lead character or characters, the character's primary goal, and the main antagonistic force. In week 1, I asked you to write down a reason that you want to write screenplays. Open up that same document or get out that same journal, and just like last time, pause the video and write down the answer to another but similar question. What is your goal for this particular screenplay? Do you want to sell it to Hollywood and see it get made? Do you want to make it yourself? Are you simply writing it for fun with no pipe dream whatsoever? Pause the video and write down the answer. Okay, so hopefully you did that. The reason I want you to think about that question is because there is a very real relationship between that goal and the concepts you choose to write. As I've already said before, there's really no getting around the fact that this is a business. And if you're making the movie yourself with your own money, you can make anything you want. But if somebody's going to invest millions of dollars into making your movie, it is reasonable for them to want to turn a profit as a result of taking that risk. And at the end of the day, the higher your budget is, the more marketable your concept needs to be. At a certain budget point, let's say north of $60 to $80 million, the only places making those movies are the major studios and a few streamers like Netflix, Amazon, and Apple. At that scale, the risk and the need for marketability becomes so high that they typically make the safest bets possible by making movies about established properties with existing built-in audiences. These might be franchises or best-selling books or comics or even toys, which is how we got the Barbie and the Lego movies. And when we do actually see something original at that scale, which is uncommon, that risk is typically offset by unbelievable concepts and writers and directors who have established track records. In other words, it's very, very unlikely that you'll sell something at that scale until you've had some success elsewhere. Even if you're at the other end of the spectrum and you're making this thing for yourself, your concept still matters. Yes, you can make it about whatever you want, but if you want your movie to have a shot at getting into the bigger festivals or landing a bigger distribution deal, both of which are also hyper competitive, a fascinating concept is going to increase your chances. And finally, even if you're only writing this for fun, having a concept that you're truly excited about is going to help you finish it. Because this course is mostly focused on writing for Hollywood, I'm going to talk about concept as it relates to that world, regardless of whether you want to work for indie companies or make a prestigious Oscar contender or write the next Star Wars. Again, there are only so many movies that get made every year. The vast majority are written by writers who have already broken in, and there are only so many managers, agents, and producers. And there are only so many places that even make movies, especially at higher budgets. And it's safe to say that there are well over 100,000 writers who are looking for their shot right now. That means there's a lot of noise. Managers and agents get several dozen to several hundred query emails every single week from writers who want to submit their screenplays, and it's the same for producers and executives. I get the occasional query, and let me just stress this, I am useless to these people. Something that aspiring writers often seem to forget is this. A manager or an agent's primary job is not to sign new writers. It's to get work for the writers who are already on the roster. And they do that by having and maintaining dozens or even hundreds of relationships with executives, producers, and more so that they know exactly what it is that they're looking for. They're busy. They don't have a lot of time to develop and break in new writers. And that means that when they actually have time to read the queries in their inbox, they want to see something that they know they can sell. If that's not immediately apparent, the chances of them deleting your email are high. It's the same with producers and executives. Do they need to find new material? Yes, but their primary focus is to get the projects that are already on their slates made. I have read some wonderful scripts by wonderful writers who I believe deserve to be professionals, but who simply can't get a break. And I think concept is one of the biggest things holding them back. Writers need samples with great marketable concepts. Aftermath, the movie of mine that just came out, was a script that I wrote back in 2012. It's an action thriller with a very easy to grasp concept. It's so easy that even though I wrote it as its own thing, I could pitch it as Die Hard on a Bridge. And because of that, it broke me in twice. The first time was back when I first wrote it, back in 2012, when I landed my first manager off of a query letter. He helped me attach big producers to it. He got me meetings at places like DreamWorks and New Line, and it was optioned by Adi Shankar, who is a great, very successful producer. That time around, it didn't get made, and I temporarily quit the business just a couple years later. When I jumped back into screenwriting in 2020, I wrote a new script and had another in my back pocket. And I think both of them were actually better than Aftermath, and both do have some momentum now, but I couldn't even get anybody to read them back then. So I dusted off Aftermath, tweaked it so it would fit with the current decade, and I put it out there. It took off all over again, earning me new representation and ultimately getting made. And it's not quite the movie that I thought it would be when I first wrote it, but it's the reason that I have a career right now. I got to be on set and meet and become friends with all sorts of cool and talented people. I have a mask on my wall that one of the actors wore in the movie. And there's just no question that concept was a major factor of making this all happen. Again, it broke me in twice. And especially when you're unknown, you need the right concept to turn heads. Here are 3 key factors that you should consider when it comes to the marketability of a script: high concept, the genre that you write it in, and the budget. You may have heard the term high concept before. To really illustrate it, let's try an exercise. I'm going to give you a few examples of movies that are so high concept that you can probably guess them without me even pointing to any specific characters or settings. So give it a shot. A horror movie where characters can't risk making a sound. An action thriller where the character wakes up with amnesia and discovers people want them dead. A comedy where the character has to relive the same day over and over again until they become a better person. If you guessed A Quiet Place, The Bourne Identity, and Groundhog Day, you win nothing because 95% of the other people guessed those too. These are ideas that are so strong and so clean that even without any context, any movie stars, or anything else, a single sentence makes you think, okay, I have to see that. That's high concept. It's a clean, simple idea that makes you go, holy shit, I have to see that. Many high concept ideas are so strong that you don't even really need a logline. Just a poster and a title will do the trick. And like it or not, this is how people are going to think about it when they get your query letter. Can I sell this movie with a poster and its title? It's no different than how Mr. Beast and Mark Rober always come up with their titles and their thumbnails before they actually write or make a YouTube video. The same basic idea. They want to know that they can capture people's attention. There are, of course, many ideas that aren't high concept, but that can turn into great movies. These are typically referred to as execution dependent. Basically, you can see how the movie would work if it were written really well, made really well, and had the right attachments. But because the bar is so high, these ideas are dangerous territory for writers without a track record. Even if you absolutely crush the script, it'll be nearly impossible to get someone to read the thing. I'm not saying you can't write something that's execution dependent, but if you want to increase your odds a little, and in my opinion, unknown writers need every edge they can get, aim for high concept. The second key factor to think about is genre. Even if you don't want your story to have a genre, as soon as people read the script or watch the movie, they're gonna put it in one. It's human nature. People like to categorize things. And if it's going to happen anyway, then you should understand what the genre of your story is, what types of movies in that space actually get made, and what audiences expect from them. Knowing those things is only going to help you, even if all you do is set your readers up to think that you're going to do one thing and then completely subvert expectations when you turn those tropes on their head. And that, by the way, is great writing. But you can't do that if you don't understand the genre. Before we dig further into genres in general, you should know that there's something that's called a genre movie. Basically, it's a movie in a genre such as action, thriller, horror, or sci-fi that sticks to the conventions that the audience expects from it. It can be used as a derogatory term to speak about movies that are cliche, low quality, and that just, get pumped out to make a quick buck, but it's not typically meant that way in the business. Genre movies can be smart and fascinating and innovative, but they're also accessible to a wide audience. And that allows producers and executives some expectation of a return on their investment. I was talking to a successful producer a couple years ago who asked me what kinds of movies I wrote. And I said, typically high concept genre movies. And he said, good, those are the kinds of movies that get made. So if you want to do this for a living and write things that actually get made, you could do worse than to write genre movies. But moving on from those, let's talk about genre in general for a bit and how it should apply when you're thinking about your concept. There are movies out there with genres that are difficult to define, even if it doesn't stop people from trying. Parasite is a great example, and it's a script and a movie worth studying. It won 6 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. But it was also written and directed by Bong Joon-ho, who had a track record of successful movies, and that gave him the juice that he needed to put that together. In the world of new screenwriters, choosing a specific genre goes a long way in terms of getting somebody to read it. And when they do read it, getting them to have some faith in it. And it can absolutely be a mashup of genres like an action comedy or a dramedy. It could also be a subgenre like a courtroom drama or a slasher. But choosing something and delivering on that will help get you reads. Also, whether it's fair or not, some genres are just more marketable than others. Based purely on my observations, action, thriller, horror, and sci-fi are genres that seem to sell or get writers noticed more than just about any others. Drama is trickier. Fantasy is really tough. Comedy was difficult for a while, but it seems to be making a comeback. And action comedies are definitely making a comeback. And that's the thing, it changes over time. I remember a time when nobody wanted assassin movies, and then John Wick came out, and suddenly there was a flurry of activity around that subgenre, and now we're back to nobody wanting them again. As I understand it, zombies, time travel, and road trips are also tricky, but someday they won't be. And I know a guy who optioned a zombie script last year. It had a really unique and fun take. And I have a time travel script that has some major momentum right now. So nothing is impossible. It's just worth understanding the additional challenges you might have, as well as the need to do something fresh. At the end of the day, genre should be a big consideration, but it shouldn't ever trump your passion for the idea. Passion is key. If you don't like what you're writing, it's gonna show up on the page. And also, if your dream is to write a certain type of movie, you want a sample that shows that you can do that. So I'm making a pretty good case for why you might want to write an action or a horror flick, but let's say that you have zero interest in those things. You'd rather write a drama. Unfortunately for you, that's like the least marketable and least high concept genre that there is. So how do you find something commercial in that space to give it the best possible chance of getting read? Well, if you can add in some comedy or sci-fi, you can suddenly do things like The Truman Show, Her, or The Martian. But let's say that's not your jam. Well, you can also base your script on a true story, but there are some problems with that. 1, you might need the life rights of somebody to do it, and 2, if it's a historical true story, it's going to be a period piece, which is going to blow the budget way up due to costumes and production design and set dressing, and that's going to scare some potential producers and companies away. But you can also do what Young Il Kim did when he first got his big break back in 2012. He had saved up some money and he took an entire year off from work and cranked out 5 spec scripts. One of those was a script called Rodham about Hillary Rodham Clinton, who was at the height of her fame at that time, in the center of the zeitgeist, and people knew she had an interesting and complicated backstory. Young crushed that script, and because of its logline, it got read by an assistant at a big management company, and within weeks, he was not only signed by them, but he was taking meetings with all the major agencies and basically every studio and production company, and it was a wild thing to watch. He wound up number 4 on that year's annual Blacklist, which is not the same thing as the pay service The Blacklist. This is the list of the most loved unproduced scripts in Hollywood. It's voted on by executives, and not too long after that, he was a working professional screenwriter. You often don't need life rights for a public figure or anything that's considered a public news event. And if you can come up with an idea that relates to something or someone in that zeitgeist, well, it's a fantastic way to separate your script from others in the genre. Let's talk about that third key factor, budget. Budget is something that I largely ignore once I start writing because I don't want it to hamper my creativity. But I consider it heavily at the concept stage because it's never a bad thing if a producer reads your logline and says, yeah, that sounds like something I could make. And if you've got a core concept that's inherently makeable for a budget, it doesn't matter if you write a huge, expensive set piece in there, an executive or producer can easily scale that back if they need to. Like I said in the last class, I wrote Aftermath as a more expensive movie. The final budget was more like $10 million, and it's still the same basic story, we just made some strategic cuts and changes to make it work. I had to make concessions to get it made, but the point is, it got made. And we still kept some things that felt pretty big, that definitely wouldn't be there if I'd written it in a way that was more budget conscious from the start. The important thing was that, given the concept and given the structure of the movie, they knew there was a way that they could make it. If you're new to this, it would be pretty normal to think something like, how am I supposed to know the difference between a $2 million, $5 million, or $25 million movie? And I totally get that. It's not the easiest thing to explain, but the good news is a lot of that information is online. With a quick look at IMDb Pro, Wikipedia, or Google, you can often figure out a movie's budget. So the more that you immerse yourself in these things, the more you'll develop an instinct for them. Here are a few things that drive up a budget. Lots of speaking characters, lots of locations, dangerous, complicated, or famous locations, lots of stunts, lots of VFX, period pieces, or anything else requiring tons of production design and costumes, life and music rights. For now, as you're coming up with ideas, my suggestion would be to look up movies that are in a similar space and see if you can find out what those budgets were. In general, the lower budget the script, the more likely it is that it's going to get made. The reason for this is pretty obvious. Like I said earlier, you've only got a handful of places at the top that make truly big budget movies. And there are only a few more places that make mid-budget movies, which is kind of like the $20 to $60 million range. But there are a number of production companies making movies in the $5 to $15 million space, and even more that are working below that threshold. And the genres range from like Blumhouse horror flicks to prestige indie films to Hallmark Christmas movies. So in terms of strategy, if you can write something on the lower end of the spectrum, it does have a better chance of getting made. But there is such a thing as too low. Once you get in the several $100,000 range, now you're talking about ultra low budget or even micro budget. And there aren't a whole lot of production companies making these movies. It's hard to sell to a wide audience without at least some production value and some name actors. These smaller movies are typically made in a truly independent way, often with writers or directors making their first or second movie and working with an independent financier for funding. So if the budget for your movie is that low and you want to see it made, keep in mind that you'll be heavily involved in making that happen. And hey, maybe that's what you want. Just be aware of it. And be aware that lots of movies get made at that scale, but not many break out and get seen. If you want to work at a Hollywood scale, or your goal is to get representation with this script, then your too low number is actually a little higher. When I broke back into this business with Aftermath, I had this contained action sci-fi script called The Continuum, and it was ready to go. And I thought it was even better than Aftermath. My former manager read it and he liked it, but said it was too low budget for him to do anything with. I had written it that way on purpose, as like a $1 to $2 million script that I thought I might be able to produce myself someday if I weren't able to get it made in Hollywood. The problem was, and I had no idea about this at the time, at that scale, it's really difficult to get a name director attached, not to mention name actors. And part of this is because there isn't as much money in it for them, but also everybody is looking to level up their own careers, and that means they're looking for things that are a little bit bigger in scope. That presents a problem for a manager or an agent because when they're trying to break a new writer into the business, they want to get that writer in front of a lot of places. It's not just about selling that particular script, it's also about introducing that writer to producers and to executives. Ideally, some of them become fans of your work and you wind up on lists for future jobs, and that's how you begin to build something that looks like a career. With The Continuum, my former manager didn't feel like he could do any of that. And even if we had sold it, at that scale, the pay might have been like $25,000 to $30,000 if I was lucky. That's not terrible money for a writer who's just breaking in, although it is well below WGA minimum, but 10% of that, which is what a manager makes, would barely have been worth his effort. So if your goal is to have something to do with Hollywood, here are what the sweet spots seem to be based on my own observations. $2 to $5 million is a great target for less expensive genres like horror, drama, and dramedies. For action, sci-fi, and genres that require a little more production value, $5 to $15 million is the range that seems to get most people excited. At these levels, there are still a lot of places making these movies, and they're big enough in scale to help you earn representation and launch a career. One other thing that's worth noting about budget. Animation is very, very expensive, and only a handful of places make animated films. It's not quite impossible to sell an animated script, but it's yet another obstacle, and you should at least be aware of it if you're gonna set out to write one. Moving on from those three key factors, you've probably heard the phrase, write what you know. In my opinion, it's really easy to misinterpret that advice in a way that's far too limiting. If you do happen to have a career or expertise or a backstory that meshes perfectly with a killer concept, that's great. You'll be able to charge that story with authenticity, and it will only help to have that background when you mention it in a query letter. But if you've got a concept that you love that's entirely unrelated to any experience you have, that's okay. I have never been a special forces operator or an astronaut or a DARPA program manager or a witch living in medieval Norway, and I've certainly never invented time travel, but my protagonists have done all of these things and more. When I find a concept I love that will force me to learn something new, I get excited by that, and I just research heavily. I usually read at least 2 books in that space. I interview subject matter experts or people who've actually done the thing that I'm writing about. And this is not that hard to do, by the way. People love talking about their areas of expertise, especially for the sake of somebody writing a screenplay. They want to see you get it right. I also do tons of research online, and I listen to podcasts on the subject, and I just really steep myself in it. I'll tell you another quick story from early in my career. My first general meeting, which is just a get to know you meeting where you meet with an industry professional who likes your work, well, that was with the president of production at DreamWorks. He'd read Aftermath and he liked it and he wanted to meet. He opened the meeting by saying, "So your manager said you were in the military?" No, I wasn't in the military, and I hadn't told my former manager that either, so I corrected the exec on the spot. I do have a lot of military family and friends though, and I asked one who'd worked with special forces if I could interview him about the experience. I bought us a bottle of whiskey, recorded our conversation, and asked questions for a few hours as we drank. And a lot of that conversation informed the script, even if it was in really subtle ways. It helped me shape the dialogue a bit, and the characters and their actions and everything. It was helpful enough that I used my friend's first name, Matthew, as the middle name for the protagonist, and that made it into the final movie. And even though I am nowhere near a true expert in this area, I came away with enough that, people at least believed my script to the point where they thought that I'd lived that experience. I'm sharing that story because it was a big learning moment for me. I realized that to some extent, if we're willing to do the work, we can know whatever it is that we want to write. So before I send you off to come up with an idea for your feature screenplay, how do you even come up with ideas? People ask me this all the time, and I think it's a question that most writers get pretty often. Some ideas definitely just come to me, but I have others which have done quite well for me that I've just sat down and generated. So it is doable. One way that I think works great is to pick a genre and set a limitation about it. I talked about this in class 1. I might say, okay, I'm going to come up with ideas for 5 action thrillers set in the Caribbean or 5 horror movies that have something to do with babies. Giving your brain that limitation helps it work. It eliminates some of the broader pathways and allows it to focus on things that might be interesting. Another way to come up with ideas is to play around with this meets that combinations. And by that, I mean you pick 2 random movies and they can be really different from each other, and then you just force yourself to come up with a concept that kind of marries those ideas. So, Let's say that I wanted to do 7 meets Top Gun, which, at first glance sounds almost impossible. And that's how it sounded to me when I first sat down to write up notes for this class. But then I started thinking about it and I realized that at bare minimum, I was talking about a serial killer and fighter jets. Okay, well, what's a situation in which you might have both of those things? Maybe you've got an aircraft carrier that's out to sea and pilots start turning up dead, one after another. That's as far as I took it, but it sounds like with a little work, you might be able to massage that into a cool movie. And that's one of any number of ideas that you could probably come up with just by combining those two films. So if you're stuck, find a list of 100 movies somewhere, use a random number generator on Google, and force yourself to come up with an idea for the first 2 movies that it picks. You may be surprised how well it works. And if you like, I made a tool for just this purpose, which you can find in the description of the video. And just like this class, it's free. Finally, remember that as you're thinking about your concepts, you want to be able to condense them into logline form. 1 or 2 sentences to describe the movie in as few words as possible, covering the setting or the scenario, the protagonist, their goal, and the main antagonistic force. Typically, you can craft a really good logline with only like 25 to 35 words, and that's the range that I recommend you shoot for because it will help you clarify your idea. Before we get into this week's assignments, I'm going to cover the cost of the course once again. You are paying yourself. You are investing in yourself. Do the work and don't skip assignments. I promise you it's gonna be worth it and you can do this. And if you're intent on buying some delusional merch after you finish, remember that you have to earn it. The other cost of the course is to pay it forward. If you're getting something out of it, share it with others. And I'd love it if you like and subscribe because the 10 seconds it'll take you to do those things will help more people see these videos. Also, if you have a question, leave a comment. I'll answer some of them here. And if you have a really great question, there's a good chance I'll use it for a future video. Anyway, assignments for week 3. First, you're going to track down and read the screenplay for a hot spec script and reflect on why it got so much heat. What is a hot spec script? It's something that gets shared around Hollywood, gets that writer a ton of meetings, and often even sells or gets made. There are plenty of ways to find these. It can be as simple as just asking around on social media. But I'll give you a big tip to get you started. The annual blacklist that I mentioned earlier is literally a collection of these scripts. The scripts themselves aren't technically public, but because so many industry people try and get their hands on them, they're pretty easy to find. And with a little internet sleuthing and perhaps working together with your group, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find them. I want you to read a hot spec script for 2 reasons. 1, it'll give you a chance to read something that has gotten Hollywood excited recently. And 2, doing that little bit of legwork will naturally help you learn a little bit more about the business and the culture of screenwriting. Second, you're going to generate 10 possible concepts for a feature. Yes, 10. Use any method you like. Feel free to even include concepts that you've already generated before if you think they're worthy, but make sure that you've got a list of 10 before you start the next class. This script is going to be a major part of the next several months of your life, so I want you to push past those first instincts and give yourself the best chance possible to come up with something great. The concepts don't need to be fully fleshed out, but you should have something close to a completed logline. Once you've finished your 10, I absolutely recommend that you share them with your group and see what others respond to. And that's it. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week.